Hi, everyone. Today we are showing featured art dares from the March Art Dare. If you are looking to strengthen and flex your art muscle, Art Prof is the community for you. We have tutorials, critiques, and more, and they're all for free. Clara, would you like to get us started?
Yeah, the March Art Dare was where we asked all of you to use any art media that you wanted, something like ink, and to throw that ink down in a spontaneous way on any surface, and then to create artwork that is a reaction to those ink blots. So it's a really fun art dare because there's a certain degree of spontaneity, unpredictability, which I think a lot of people had fun being challenged by, because that's not always the easiest thing to do. So let's get started with the first artist. This is Aleene Vandersteen from the Netherlands, and she says that they wanted to try the art dare because it forces you to deal with unexpected composition. Aleene says, I wanted to depict the way people in different stages of their lives deal with uncertainties. So this first piece has a sense of movement, and so Aleene painted an unborn. Second painting is a young adult, because the chaos reminded me of how I feel sometimes, especially with the pandemic going on. And then the third painting is an old woman sitting and observing the chaos without being affected by it. She's old and wise and knows how to handle things and remain calm in a chaotic environment. So what's your take on Aleene's three pieces, Deepti?
What I love about the three pieces is the sense of like movement that the unpredictable ink blot has created and how you've formed a narrative from that. Like in the first piece, there's such a sense of this unborn child like just floating on by, and the movement just really feels like it's carrying them into the abyss, and they're just kind of complacent with it. And then in the second piece, it really feels like this energy is coming out of this young child. Like it's being forced out. And like you said in your art dare, it's kind of, that is where it's generated from. The energy is coming from inside. And in the third piece, it really does feel through the expression and even the stance of the figure that this energy is an outward element that is around the person but not affecting them. And I think it's really amazing how you've used the different blots and the energy that just came from what you created to create this whole narrative. I think that's really special.
What I really like about the work is how the ink blots and the figures come in and out. Do you see how in some of the parts of the figures, they're very clear cut, like the back part of the baby's head is very well articulated. But then when you look at the feet almost dissolve into the ink blot. So I love the layering effect.
Yeah, I agree. The layering is great because it doesn't make the ink blot feel separate than the figures. They really like, and I think that, lends to why we read it as like energy and a part of the composition, is because you found a way to integrate both elements together in a way that's super believable and creates this cohesive world.
Yeah, like HT Pokepack says, there's a great cohesion with these three pieces. Love it. Lisa is pointing out the consistent colors. Yeah, I mean, there aren't a lot of colors. It's a fairly monochromatic piece. But I think given that the three images are very different, picking just that one color to be the same was very, very helpful. And Seven Angelics has lots of emotion. Neil says, I love the subtlety of color here. And Seven Angelic also says, yes, I like the limited palette. And they're also really different, Deepti, in terms of the placement on the composition. Like, do you see how this figure is almost like falling downwards? But then if I go back to the baby almost feels like it started at the top and then floated downwards. And then this person seems almost like stuck in the center. So there's like really different sense of gravity.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting, especially because there's so much motion and movement. The way that you've used that movement to create a sense of gravity and space is also really impressive.
All right, so let's move on and take a look at the next artist. This is Jason Dye. And Jason explains, as a graphic design student, my attitude towards artistic creation can be too methodical and product-driven. I took advantage of this art dare to embrace the uncertainty. Tell us in the chat, how many of you here really treat the art dares as a chance to do something different, step out of your comfort zone, because that's hard to do. It's not something a lot of us want to do, but we need to do it to stretch our muscles. So I want to hear how many people have had that experience with the art dares. So Jason says, first I made a lot of white ink marks on black paper, created diversity by adjusting the ink density, making the ink flow by rotating the paper, making texture with toothpicks, napkins, salt, and a sponge. And then I scanned these ink marks. Finally, I made these pictures in Procreate. Wow, that's a lot of stages to put your work through. That's amazing. What's your reaction, Deepti?
I am so impressed by the amount of effort that you put into these. And they're so like quirky feels like the wrong word, but they have so much personality to them. They're really simple. It's not like overworked, but I love that. I love the simplicity of it. It actually reminds me of this. I believe he's a Japanese artist, Ishinobu. His work has a really similar quality to it, and I love his work, and it reminds me of yours. But I love that you're using your graphic design capabilities, but also it feels like there's like a sense of humor and character design that's coming through. And they're also fun and unique and specific. It's really a joy to spend time with each one of these pieces.
They're quirky, but they're sort of dark at the same time. Like this creature looks like he's gonna lick me, and I don't know if I'm very happy about that. The dark humor is definitely present.
Well, yeah, we have a comment here from Neil that's saying, this is so unsettling. I like it. I kind of think that encompasses what you were saying. It's like, you like it, but it also makes you feel some type of way.
And also, Deepti, I think the fact that Jason did the images on black, that's unusual. I think most people, if you say make an ink blot, their first impulse is to take a white sheet of paper. I think this really transformed the way that the images came out.
Totally. It's really bold. And I think it kind of speaks to your intelligence as a graphic designer too, to kind of think outside of the box and think about how this like really stark contrast and the space and the compositions could work or be enhanced on a black canvas rather than what we generally gravitate to, which is a white canvas.
And I love the integration of the color, that the color feels very intentional. And yet we don't lose the black and the white as the primary vehicle for the images.
Yeah, absolutely. The color is so satisfying. I love this piece especially. And the color also feels very on, like it goes hand in hand with the mood of each piece. Like in the previous one, the colors were a bit brighter and lighter, whereas this one, it's a little bit more moody and dark and kind of goes with that unsettling, creepy figure that we're looking at. So it's, again, like it's not just like you threw some random colors on. I feel like there was a lot of thought put into it, which I love to see.
The other fun thing is the treatment of edges is very different. Sometimes it's very harsh, very clean graphic edge of a shape or a line. But actually, do you see the contour of this space? That almost makes me think of photography, thinking about photograms and cyanotypes. So I don't know how you got these marks, Jason, but it's really amazing that they're all combined into a single composition.
I think that's part of the reason I love it too, is that there's a lot of curiosity that piques in me. I'm like, I couldn't figure out a lot of how you created your pieces, what you used, and you use so many different tools, but that's really cool. But yeah, it reminds me even of like x-rays and, like you said, cyanotypes. There's a quality of it that reminds me of so many things, but I can't pinpoint it, which is a really cool thing to be able to do as an artist, is to make your viewers think of a bunch of things, but not actually know how you created it. You're like a magician.
I also really like the distortion of the faces. I mean, this is totally up your alley, in terms of messing with the expressions and stretching skulls. And I just think that they're so different. Each one is its own distinctive image, but they're clearly a series. That's such a hard balance to attain.
I love this comment from Vishaka that says Jason committed to the pieces so much. And I think that's a great way of viewing these pieces. Like, you really can see that each piece had a sense of commitment to them. And Jason was really, invested in each piece, which translates through when we're looking at them.
Emily says, I have used materials in the art dare that I have not used before or since. And Jasmine, who, by the way, we're going to look at your work in about a second. Yes, I love to explore through the art dares. And Phoebe P says, the art dares forced me to think in a way that I may not have thought before. Very grateful for that. And it's nice because the art dares only last so long. It's just a month. And so if you do the art dare and you're like, oh, this sucks, it ends pretty quickly. I mean, I find that I need to do that to shake up my practice. Do you ever feel that way, Deepti?
Totally. Having something push you to just try something new is a great way of just experimenting. The reason I love the art dares too is because you can also go on the Discord and chat with other people who are doing the art dare and talk about how much you hate it or how much it's rocking your world. Like, there's a community involved with the art dare, which sometimes if I want to try something new, I won't want to do it because nobody gets how awful it is to try this new thing. But if you're doing an art dare, you at least have a community of people that you can be like, hey, this is really not working for me. And there's like a camaraderie there, which I think is really fun.
Well, it really reminds me of art school, where I say, okay, everybody go do this. And the next week, everybody shows up with something. And it's fun to see how people react to different prompts. Okay, we are going to look at Jasmine Alvarado's pieces. And Jasmine, I believe you are live in the chat, so please say hello. We love it when the artist is here live. It's so wonderful to have you here. So Jasmine says, I guess I've been watching too many superhero movies with my family, and it's a superhero from another planet, or you can make up your own opinion. Love it. Are you a superhero person like Jordan, Deepti?
Definitely not like Jordan. I like a good Batman movie here and there, but I'm not a huge superhero fan. But maybe this will turn me. This looks pretty cool.
Well, I am when Christian Bale and Benedict Cumberbatch are involved, but other than that, I could care less.
Of course, that's what makes you interested.
Jasmine says, I decided to add eyes, other details, darkening the gray around some of the areas until I was happy with it. And the second one I created was inspired. Oh, wait, this is out of order. Okay, this one. Second one I created was inspired by the cute monster that Stephan Boucher creates. So Stephan Boucher was one of the artists that I showed as an example when we introduced the art dare, so you guys can look him up. And then Jasmine says the last one was just trying out a technique. I saw printing the flower outline in ink. I used red ink and water to shade in the flower, and I used the dust cleaner for the background. Wow. You did a lot of work, Jasmine. What do you think, Deepti?
Yeah, you did a lot of work and it really shows. I mean, you're almost creating a whole world in each of your pieces. And especially with this one, what I love is like, it feels almost like in, Harry Potter when you see the dark mark in the sky and it's like a cloud and then you see something emerge, but you just keep seeing things. Like even in the top half, I feel like I see the world that is happening or like a war between two sides. It's like I could spend so much time with this piece and really, really dig so much out of it, which I think is so impressive because at the end of the day, it's, just like a ink blot that you've added some detail to, but you've really done a lot of work and smart thinking to create a piece that creates a lot of intrigue.
Jasmine says, I'm all about fantasy too. Well, to me, this image combines, like Deepti said, so many elements of fantasy and superheroes because maybe it's just the MCU, the Marvel Universe, but everything's so apocalyptic. Have you ever noticed this? It always looks like the end of the world in every single Marvel movie. I mean, maybe I'm not watching them carefully enough, but this is definitely, I don't know, I feel like I'm in the middle of Ragnarok when I look at this drawing.
I mean, it is kind of the end of the world in all of those. If they don't, win, the world is technically over. So yeah, it does feel like the weight of this face coming at us is like, it's now or never. And you're kind of just seeing the fate of the universe in this person's face. And that's very ominous of like, it's their job to save the universe. It's like all in them. So lots of layers.
And it's funny, Deepti, this one is somewhat similar in terms of the mark making, but the mood is totally different.
Yeah, the mood is totally different. And I think that the use of color has a lot to do with that because it lightens it. And of course, a flower has a lighter, feeling to it just in general in terms of symbolism. But there is a similar feeling of like an object coming out of something and coming towards you and what that might mean. And that has a lot of symbolism. So, and there's that kind of similar center composition of where we're being like drawn in and sucked into this thing that's coming out of us. So I do see similar threads throughout these two pieces, but they do have very different moods. How do you interpret this piece, Clara?
I feel that the rose is really gigantic. I feel like it's 50 feet across and that I'm floating in the sky and looking down on it and it's coming out of the muck. I don't know, there's something really particular about the movement. It could be that the ink blots are like spreading out, but the thing is the rose itself looks pretty clean. So it feels like it's coming out of all the muck. And I love that distribution of gravity and movement. Really exciting. Yeah, like Jasmine says, like a lotus flower. How about this one?
This one, again, gives me similar feelings to the first piece of hers that we looked at because there is this figure, but I feel like the weight of the world is on this figure. But actually in this one, I feel like the world is generated through this figure because it feels like there's a growth coming out of it. And the amount of textures here is so interesting. Like the part above the figure feels like land to me or like wooden structures, but the part below feels almost like water or fog. And it's funny because I was just watching this show on Netflix called Shadow and Bone right before. It's like #1 on Netflix. And it's this fantasy show. And there's all these like ships and creatures. And this really reminds me of that. Like it's so subtle. It's not like you're slapping us over the head with all these creatures and characters and stuff, but just the weird distortion of the face and the shapes that are coming out of it, and just everything combined really gets me feeling like I'm in a new world and I'm in a new kind of ominous fantasy world, which is so impressive that you can do that with, the piece that you're making.
Lindsay says, I love this one. And Brooklyn, whose work we're going to look at later, says the insight you guys give on these feature videos blows my mind. Well, I really like these videos because it's so nice to spotlight the community because, it's nice to talk about Michelangelo and everything, but Michelangelo, he's a little out of date right now. So we like talking about stuff that's a little bit more relevant to our current lives. But Jasmine, what I really like about this piece is what a great range of value. Do you see how even though there's like black, there's a lot of subtle grays in there, like especially the lower left-hand corner, those like very, very thin, delicate lines that are to the left of the face. That's hard to do with ink blots because oftentimes with ink blots, it's like black or white. And the range you got is really outstanding, Jasmine. Okay, the next artist who I believe is also live in the chat is, let's see, I just lost, here it is. Lindsay, who is from Canada. And Lindsay says, I created this using Citrusolve and pages from National Geographic magazines, transferred some lines using a white gel pen, scanned them, and then did some more work digitally using Procreate. Lindsay explains, I was definitely outside my comfort zone because so much of it was random and out of my control, but I think it's good to stretch myself. What do you think?
It's so impressive to me that you say that this is out of your comfort zone because it feels like a really, really strong, controlled piece to me. Like I feel like this is, oh yeah, this is what Lindsay does. They feel like ancient map artifacts that we've found, which I think is cool that you use National Geographic, but you've made it your own. They almost look like topographical maps, but they feel old to me and they feel wise. And, it's funny how like fantastical so many of these pieces that we're featuring feel, but I just love the amount of color and value and variation, and it's so rich, each of these pieces. Like I really just want to stick my hand into the screen and hold one and like hold it up close and look at everything. There's just so much there. It's really beautiful and juicy.
Well, some of you may have caught my image transfer stream I did a couple of days ago using jelly plates and acrylics. And the process that Lindsay mentions using Citrusolve for a transfer is pretty similar in that you have a photo and you can transfer it. But the difference with Citrusolve, which is amazing, is you can actually capture the color of the magazine photo. The one that I did, you couldn't do that. It just works with the color of the ink. But maybe we need to do a Citrusolve image transfer stream because you can see how beautiful it is.
So beautiful. I love this comment from my Hika saying, well, those textures look so cool and it looks so intriguing. We also have a question from Vishaka saying, has she used gold leaf? So Lindsay is actually here in the comments. So Lindsay, maybe you want to answer that in the comments to Vishaka.
Lindsay adds, I'm old and wise. I love it. Absolutely. I mean, Deepti, I feel like I'm looking at history. And it's almost like looking at a cave painting. Like when I was traveling in southern Utah a couple summers ago, there are all these petroglyphs everywhere. And it's just layers and layers of stuff dripping down and calcium deposits and rock and sand. And that's the experience that I get looking at these, that it's over a very long period of time, which is hard to do with materials. I think building up that depth and richness is very challenging.
Absolutely. Yeah. It feels like something that we just like cracked off of a mountain wall, or like, it doesn't even feel like it was created by man. It almost feels like it's like part of the earth or something like that. Like nature gave this to us, which is so cool that you made this and it feels that way.
Lindsay says, no gold leaf. All right. Well, really cool without gold leaf. You're doing just fine without it, but maybe sometime in the future. Jason A says they look like journals that were left after a fire. Whoa, I love that. I mean, it feels like work, Lindsay, that has a story to it. We don't necessarily know what that story is. And Seven Angelic says, like, these are geological slides. Love it. Really beautiful work. Okay, let's take a look at Sally Storman. They are from the USA. And Sally says, this piece is a part of a series about communication pre and post pandemic. Oh, trust me, we're all thinking about that right now and have been for a while. So Sally says, I'm trying to combine representational and abstract elements, used traditional wash and glaze watercolor techniques, as well as splattering and stenciling. And Sally says their motivation was to get away from the wishy-washy tight watercolor paintings, to explore full range of expression, and to describe the scene that I observed, to make a comment about the way our phones can prevent communication just as much as they foster it. What do you think, Deepti?
What I noticed immediately is your the control that you have with the medium, which is so exciting. Like the background has so much spontaneity and looseness to it and really just feels like loose and free. But the figures are so beautifully done and really show a lot of control with a medium that can often be pretty unpredictable. And, it's not overworked. It's not like we're seeing every detail, but the sense of lighting, the fabric folds, the facial expressions, it's all very specific. And it's such a lovely duality with this background that feels really loose and energetic and like you really set free. So I love that. And then I also love that there's a narrative element to it of like a social commentary that you're making. So not only is it technically impressive, but there's a conceptual aspect to it too that creates a lot of intrigue.
I just want to show this comment from Lindsay, who says, thank you so much for showing my work and your critique. It means a lot to me. Well, you're welcome, Lindsay, and thank you so much for participating in this art dare. And all of you guys here, even if you are not featured in this video, because a lot of people did the art dare, it's like Deepti said, it's a community initiative. And so the more people that participate, the more rich and diverse your experiences seeing everybody's stuff. And I would say, Sally, I think you definitely avoided the fussy watercolor technique that you mentioned in your artist statement. I mean, I am definitely somebody who has to hold back in that arena because I feel that watercolor is so difficult to control, and it is easy for it to run away away from your intent. Sometimes it's easy to just get caught up in all the fussing. But Deepti, even when I look at the figures, they're pretty straightforward in terms of the marks. Like, there's not a lot of noodling going on. It's pretty straightforward. Like, the marks are very confident.
They're super bold and confident. And it's, again, I think a sense of control that this artist has over the medium. Like, you know, you're not letting the watercolor get away from you. You have control over that watercolor and you're telling it what to do, which I love because watercolor can often tell you what to do. But I love that there's a level of just, it's very sensitive too. Like, even though there's not a lot of fussing going around, it's very sensitive in where you're placing color and light and where you are layering more and where you are holding back. So you're clearly showing your skill as a watercolor artist here, which I think is really important and impressive.
Lisa says, unusual to see both tight and loose in one watercolor. Yeah, most of the time people are all abstract or all representational, and mixing the two is not easy, but I think you did a really great job, especially the color scheme really holds up between the abstraction and the figures. I definitely can see that relationship. And Emily says the use of negative space on the coats is gorgeous. Oh, I know, like leaving the white of the page and not messing it up is really hard. And you can see the areas where Sally was so deliberate about not painting the page.
Yeah, and that's really important, like in watercolor. That's such a beautiful tool to use as the white of the page. A lot of times people don't realize that that's like a whole nother element that you can use. And you're using it beautifully here because I think the lighting is something that's really strong. And you can see that you're using the white of the page in so many areas on the figures. So I think that's great. I also like this comment from Maya Hika saying, I love the narrative element, even though it's so subtle. Yeah, it's true. You know, like there's so much going on in the background and the colors are so lush. Sometimes you just get focused on that, but there is a really strong narrative element here and it's well thought out. You know, it's not like it's beating us over the head with like, oh, this is about communication and our cell phone use, but like the child in the image, like holding on to the parent, and the phone in the hand, like it's all things that as we spend more time with the piece, we start to dig out, which is really great.
All right, let's look at the next artist. This is Pamela Staples. Pamela's from the US, and Pamela says, this is not only the first art dare I have done, but also the first time I have ever shown anyone my art. I don't feel like I'm very good, but this art dare moved me to just create something for the fun of it. I'm proud I actually posted it. I found out I liked playing with watercolor in this way, and I've continued on this path. Thank you for pushing me beyond my boundaries. What do you think, Deepti?
Well, I want to give you a huge round of applause, Pamela, for feeling confident and putting your work out there because it's an awesome piece and I think it should be shown. And that's, you know, it does take a lot of confidence, but hopefully Art Prof has a community that makes you feel safe and encouraged to do so. So I'm so excited that you did that. And like, wow, look at this piece. It is really impressive. The amount of energy that is just coming out through this piece. You can see that you had a lot of fun creating it. And there's layers to it. You're using color, the control of your marks, and also the looseness of the marks. There's a really lovely relationship there. And there's so much detail and texture in this piece. It's not like just loose ink blots. There's like really controlled spots all over. And it just feels so layered and lush. I think it's a really wonderful piece. What do you think, Clara?
Oh, absolutely. It's one of those pieces where you definitely feel the immediate impact because there is a skeletal structure to this. Even though it's fairly abstract, I do feel a weight on the left-hand side. Then things start to spread out a little bit more. And there's a brittle quality to the lines that I think is gorgeous. But then when you get up close, it's almost like you're discovering multiple galaxies and you start to realize what's there. So it's a really great piece in that it grabs you right away. But the thing is, it keeps giving you more to chew on. And sometimes I see artworks where they make an immediate impact, but then I sort of lose interest because maybe there's not as much to look at. But Pamela, this is a piece I want to spend time with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the people in our comments are feeling the same way. Like we have comments from Emily saying, beautiful, it reminds me of a koi fish. Lindsay is saying, I see a face. Soyton Lee is also saying, I see a face. And I love this comment from Jason saying, so glad you took the risk and shared your work. It's a wonderful composition. It's clearly a piece that's making people feel a lot of emotions and want to spend time with it. And everyone is having their own interpretation of what they're seeing, which is also a really fun experience for an audience and makes you want to not only look at a work, but also discuss a work, which is awesome.
And Pamela, good for you for sharing your work, because it is very intimidating sometimes to show your work. I mean, you almost feel like somebody's flaying your skin off or something. When you put it out there, you could feel so vulnerable. Like, tell me in the chat, how many of you here have experienced that, like, oh, I don't want to share this? And then what helped you get over that challenge? Because it is so hard for a lot of people to share their work.
And I just want to note that Pamela is actually here with us. So I hope she's reading all of these lovely comments from our community, because it seems like everyone's really excited and proud of you for sharing your work.
Yeah, and I would just remind everybody, just share what you're comfortable with. I know a lot of people will say to me, oh, well, if I don't share, then people think I don't exist anymore. And I'm like, it's not a big deal. It's a very personal decision when you're ready to show your work or what you show. And I actually encourage to a lot of artists, I say, listen, have a private part of your practice. Make drawings that you don't show anybody. I think that we need a little bit more of that in today's oversharing world. Okay, let's take a look at the next artist. This is Brooklynn Bolton, and she says, this piece is a representation of life's different stages. Brooklynn explains, I recently experienced a really painful miscarriage. Used the art dare to explore the positive feelings of when I carried my baby, what it felt like to hold that life and dream about what was going on inside. And so Brooklynn says that she used fluid acrylic and water to make the blotches, filled in the spaces created by what my mind felt made sense. And then one of the pieces represents how Brooklynn felt, quote, when I first saw my baby's heartbeat on the sonogram. And then the other piece with hands helps me remember the joy of holding my belly and worshiping God with the little life inside of me.
Wow, this is a really, really powerful, series of pieces. And again, talking about sharing your work, it's so amazing that you created these pieces that were so personal and specific to your journey, and you shared it with us. Like, it's a privilege for us to be able to spend time with these pieces. But I'm from a technical standpoint, they're also just so beautiful and have so many layers to them. I see so much, but then also talk about an artist statement. These pieces stand alone as wonderful, gorgeous pieces that I find myself drawn to. But then reading that artist statement and hearing about what inspired you to create these pieces and what moved you to show them in this way adds such a deeper level to them. So, these are really, really incredible pieces that it feels like such a privilege to even get to enjoy as an audience member.
And we were just talking about Pamela putting her work out there, which was very much a risk and felt probably very scary and intimidating at first, but obviously you did it, and we're so glad you did, Pamela. But I do think Deepti, sharing such a personal, heartbreaking experience, that is also very hard, because I think just emotionally, you're so invested in it. It is so personal. But it's like, look at what you made, Brooklynn. It's beautiful, but it's also haunting at the same time. Part of me is so attracted to the delicate quality, like some of these close-ups, the pen work of the flowers is gorgeous. But the thing is, there's something about the silhouettes that I find just really disturbing in a way. And so that quality of those shapes with the beautiful, elegant flowers, it's really a lot to process. And I think it really does capture the personal story that Brooklynn told in the statement.
Absolutely. I mean, it adds a whole nother layer to the idea of like what it is to be pregnant and the fears that come with that. You know, it's not always the joy of, you know, oh, great, like this is a positive thing, but, you know, there's layers to it. And, you know, as someone who might carry a child, there's always a fear. And especially with this green one, it feels like there's like life coming out of it and it's so beautiful in the details. But when we zoom out and look at the whole figure, there almost is like an ominous face that I feel like is encapsulating all of this joy. And it's kind of illustrating that duality of like, you know, there's always something lingering that's a little bit fearful, even in this world of joy, which I think is amazing that you're able to create all these layers and make us think of all of these things with your work.
Blue Wren says, I can't think of a better way to process your grief than to paint it. And we can see from a lot of these comments that you're really touching people, Brooklynn, with your story. And that is very, very powerful that you can communicate with people in that way. Like Jason says, very brave of you, Brooklynn, to face that part of your life in making these pieces and then sharing that part of yourself here, touching work on technical and emotional levels. Thank you. And Brooklynn explains the middle black spikes in the green represent the pain physically and the death turning to life. And I also have to say, miscarriage is not something people talk about that much. I mean, I think that some people are starting to talk about it. I mean, I don't know if you saw, Deepti, but Meghan Markle wrote that article about her miscarriage. And I know that that's not something you read about all the time. And so I think you sharing that helps people realize, like a lot of people don't realize how common it is to have miscarriage because it does not get talked about very much. So I think it's a remarkably powerful piece, so eloquent the way that you express yourself. And I just am so overcome with emotion looking at those. All right, now this is a really cool piece from Clea, and this is a little hybrid art dare because we have art alongs and we have art dares, but sometimes they collide and turn into a hybrid situation because Clea explains it all started with your crab drawing video, which was my first live drawing session with you. And then I continued with the art dare. My first blobs turned out really uninteresting. Decided to compress them against a plastic sheet. So from the ink remaining on the plastic, I printed a monotype in my sketchbook. Those printed blobs turned out to have just the same form as the bodies of the crabs I just sketched. So I continued with this theme, drawing several crabs in different positions from the reference photos you provided.
I think you might have to dive even deeper with the crabs. It seems like crabs are in your universe and the universe is trying to tell you something because these are so cool. They have such a quirky, fun, you know, personality to them. And I love the molding of like using two of our, you know, our video and our art dare together. Like that's so fun and exciting to see as like the people behind the scenes. But yeah, I kind of want to see you just make a whole series on crabs and where you go with these crabs because they're so fun. And honestly, don't you think, Clara, they have a lot of personality to them, even though they aren't super detailed or hyper specific. But I really feel like these crabs I feel like they're dancing. Like I can see them animated.
I feel like I can hear them because, you know, they have that click clack sound. I feel like I'm hearing like I can feel them scuttling across the surface. They're so active and lively.
Yeah, definitely. And like I think part of it has to do with the variety of textures that you created in these pieces. Like we have a comment that I just, from Seven Angelic that says that one crab on the top corner looks fluffy. Like I agree. There's like, some of them look kind of fluffy. Some of them look rough. And so the textures that you've created in your process are really like lending to the personality of these pieces. But I would love to see all of them like given a name and like some sort of characterization. Like I feel like their movement, even like the way that their legs are, each of them, like some of them have a wider stance. The one on the top left really feels like compact. The one on the bottom right is like on his back. Why is he on his back? That's so funny. I mean, I know, you know, it's like it creates like personality for all of them, which I think is hilarious and so funny.
Tell me in the chat, have any of you done an art dare and then based on your experience with it, gone on and developed something further? Because Clea, I think this might be a case where you're onto something. And maybe this is not just an exercise for a month. Maybe you need to push these even further to a bigger, more ambitious project, because people are just loving these. I mean, this is a great description. Neil says, my favorite is the bottom right. He's just so bleh. It is true. He's just like, but then the one in the lower left, Phoebe says, I like the gradient. That one looks very calm and centered by comparison. They just have such great personalities. I love it.
Yeah, I think you've done such a good job of using like an art dare and like one of our videos and molding those together to create something new and fun and unique to you, which I think is such a wonderful way of using our content as a launching off point, but then making it your own.
Well, because ultimately we're giving you specific resources and tutorials, but I think what we're teaching, it's like raw materials. Like we want you to take that raw material from as many different places and then make it your own. Give your work your own voice. And that is definitely prominent here. Blue Run says, I agree with Clara. Clea needs to run with this. So we would love to see that and keep in touch so we can see what you're up to. Okay, the next artist is Aurelian Adams. He's from Scotland. And Aurelian says, focus mainly on textures and made with thicker mediums to create interesting textural effects that are difficult to achieve with brushes. Aurelian says, I experimented with cutting out the ink blot shapes, create more 3D structures. I used the dried acrylic paint on my palette and used the shape of the ink blot to create shape. Some areas of the paint are thinner than others, which cause tears. Dried paint was an odd shape, so the overall piece isn't entirely symmetrical. Aurelian says, I hope to continue making the 3D ink blots once I have built up enough paint on my palette and eventually layer them up on glass panes.
I love this idea, and what a great way of using something that already exists, like your acrylic palette, and creating work out of it. I mean, it's so sculptural and exciting to see these pieces, and also like what an innovative way of thinking of ink blots, not to like add onto a surface, but rather take off of a surface. Like that is really cool to me.
It's so fun because you could totally just do the literal ink blots on paper, but it's like everybody had such a different interpretation of what was a quote ink blot. I mean, how many people thought about doing a 3-dimensional ink blot? I mean, I just think that's such a great take on the prompt. And they're weird. Like they're sort of these strange, sinewy, stretchy, plastic qualities. I almost feel like they're figurative.
They're so figurative. I mean, I want to like jump in and touch them, but also they feel precious in a sense where like I can see them in a gallery hung up and I know I'm not supposed to touch it. I also love it because I feel like it could be made of so many different things. It could be made of metal, but also it could be made of like a gloopy thing that I can move around. Like I think part of me wants to touch these pieces because I want to know, like, will it clank when I touch it, or will it like have a little bit of, you know, a jelly surface? There's so much curiosity with them, and I see so many like figures and animals and structures in it. It's really like layered, which is wonderful.
And it's fun because we look at these two and they're very graphic because they have the clear contour. But what a difference with these two, which are just really quiet, subtle, and mysterious. And it's hard to make work like this, Deepti, because usually people want a full value range. They want highlights. They want grays. But this is so limited value-wise. And yet I love the atmosphere.
Absolutely. I mean, they feel so natural. It feels like a piece of nature that's been encapsulated onto this like canvas. And it doesn't feel overbearing or too much. It feels like a whisper almost of something, but it's just enough. It's just enough for us to want to spend time with it and have a relationship with this piece.
Yeah, so I think Aurelian, just between these two techniques, so much experimentation. And that really is the heart of the art dares, is getting yourself to try something new that you ordinarily would not have done, because I think we can all see how much we get influenced by that. And this little thing that we thought wasn't a big thing can grow and develop into something a lot bigger. Like Seven Angelic says, looks like a nebula. Jason A says, great idea and interesting process. And Emily says, I wish we could touch art more. I love being able to touch my own art and feel the textures. And Jasmine says, they are organic looking, amazing. I mean, I love these streams, Deepti, because they're so inspiring, like just seeing so many different variations on the same theme.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I just want to go make a bunch of work now. And I'm like, why haven't I done this art there? You know, like it really does show how something super simple, like an ink blot, can inspire so many different ways of thinking, and how different all of us are, but how much we can pull from each other's work and, you know, discuss each other's work and find inspiring. So it's inspiring for me, you know, and I hope it is for our community too, to see all our community's work shown like this.
Tell us in the chat, who feels inspired? I do. I feel like getting up and going and doing some artwork. But before I do that, we do have to announce the prizes. And the prizes go to Jason Dye, who is receiving the honorable mention. We love the series, Jason. You were so productive. This series has so much personality and great engagement with the material.
Absolutely. I mean, I can't get enough of these pieces, Jason, and I want them all in my house. Basically, they're like so fun, the material use, and really you committed to this art dare in a way that was so impressive. So that really impressed all of us.
Great job. All right, guys, you ready? Prize winner goes to Brooklynn for the pieces about their experience with a miscarriage. And Brooklynn, I think you saw from the comments in the chat how moved everybody was by this piece. And I just think it's so hauntingly beautiful. It's a piece that I'm going to keep mulling over for a long period of time. I don't know what your other work is like, but I just was so struck by the impact of this piece.
Yeah, that's, I think, encompasses it. It's so beautiful technically and conceptually as well, but the impact and how it's going to like linger is really something that we all thought about, and just how it made us feel and the effect these pieces had, because they're so specific to you. And also it was just really like amazing that you wanted to share this with us, and the result of that was so impactful to us. So these are such beautiful pieces, and, you know, I hope you're very, very proud of them.
And I just want to say thank you to everybody for being so supportive of each other. That is such a big part of this experience, is all of you rooting each other on and getting inspiration from each other, because that is such a big part of the experience.
Absolutely.
Now remember, we still have the April Art Dare, just a few days left, inspired by Deepti's selfie self-portraits. So please take a look at that and consider submitting. You can tag us on Instagram with hashtag ArtProfDare. We also have an upload form on our site if you are not on social media. Art Prof has a podcast. It's available on Spotify and also on iTunes. And in a few minutes, Deepti and I will be hanging out in the post live streams channel, so we can talk about how tasty crabs are, because that's what I've been thinking about. And subscribe to the Art Prof YouTube channel so you can continue to grow and develop as an artist. And a big thank you to our top Patreon supporters. This community, you are the ones that make Art Prof what it is. I feel that I'm just along for the ride. I feel that all of you do the heavy lifting for us. It's an amazing, inspiring community. Everybody, thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye.